The Hart Senate Office Building hearing room did not smell of justice. It smelled of lemon pledge, stale coffee, and the unique, metallic scent of high-voltage television lighting cooking the dust in the air. It was a smell Kash Patel knew well, the olfactory signature of the swamp. The room was a cavern of mahogany and marble, designed decades ago to make small men feel like giants and to make witnesses feel like insects under a magnifying glass. But today, the dynamic was inverted. The air conditioning hummed a low, industrial drone, battling the heat generated by the wall of cameras positioned at the back of the room. Their lenses, like the unblinking eyes of a firing squad, were all trained on the witness table. Kash Patel sat alone. He didn't fidget. He didn't shuffle the papers in front of him. He didn't pour water from the sweating glass carafe. He simply sat, his posture comprised of right angles and stillness, a singular point of calm in a room vibrating with performative anxiety. To the casual observer, he looked like a bureaucrat awaiting a procedure. To those who knew the game, the real game, he looked like a predator waiting for the tall grass to part. Across the dais, the Senate Judiciary Committee was a tableau of shifting eyes and whispered consultations. Staffers, young and frantic, scurried behind the high-backed leather chairs like palace servants, sliding index cards and frantic notes into the hands of their masters. They were loading the ammunition. Senator Cory Booker sat 3 seats from his center. The Democrat from New Jersey was in motion before he even spoke. He adjusted his microphone. He smoothed the lapel of his suit. He touched his glasses. Every movement was a calibration, a desperate attempt to find the perfect angle for the evening news clips. Booker wasn't here to investigate. He was here to audition. From the pro-Republican perspective, the desperation radiating off Booker was palpable. The Democratic establishment was hemorrhaging power. The administrative state, the Leviathan that had ruled Washington for 50 years unchecked, was being dismantled brick by brick, and the man sitting at the witness table was the demolition expert. Booker knew it. The fear behind his eyes wasn't about policy, it was existential. Booker leaned into the microphone. The red light atop the gooseneck stem flickered to life. "Mr. Patel," Booker began. His voice was a practiced baritone, modulated to convey a mixture of grave concern and moral superiority. It was the voice of a man who believed his own press releases. "I want to start off where we left off last time." Patel didn't blink. He watched Booker's mouth move, dissecting the cadence. This was the wind-up. "I asked you whether you had any knowledge or discussions about removing FBI officials and installing political personnel before you were confirmed to that position," Booker said, his eyes darting down to his script and then back up to the camera, checking his lines. "And I wonder, did you then understand or have conversations with the White House about the intentions to do so?" Booker paused for a fraction of a second, a rhetorical beat intended to let the implication hang in the air like smoke. "Before I was confirmed?" The trap was clumsy. It was a standard issue Washington snare. Get the nominee to deny political discussions, then blindside them with a leaked email or a calendar entry showing a meeting with a staffer. It relied on the witness being scared, defensive, and eager to please. Booker expected a dodge. He expected a "senator, I don't recall," or a "we discussed broad themes." He was ready to pounce on the evasion. Patel leaned forward just an inch. The movement was economical, precise. "Yes, sir," Patel said. 2 words. Flat, monotone, unapologetic. The air in the room seemed to hitch. Booker blinked. The rhythm in his head, the rehearsed back and forth he had practiced in the mirror, shattered. He had thrown a punch expecting to hit a guard, but his opponent had simply nodded and let the fist sail past. "Yes." He just said yes. Booker's brow furrowed. The gotcha moment evaporated before it could condense. He scrambled to reset the trap, assuming Patel hadn't understood the gravity of the question. "Did I have discussions with the White House to remove FBI personnel?" Booker repeated, his voice rising slightly, an incredulous lilt creeping in at the edges. "Yes," Patel said again. "No," Booker blurted out. It was a reflexive denial of reality. The senator was so accustomed to the dance of deception that the truth felt like a foreign language. He looked down at his notes, then back at Patel, his eyes widening. He was losing control of the narrative in the first 30 seconds. So, Booker stammered, trying to reconstruct the premise he had just lost. You're saying that you had no discussions with the White House before you were in the position about the removal of any personnel from the agency. Patel watched the senator flail. It was almost pitiable. Booker was trying to put words in his mouth, trying to force a denial so he could act the part of the outraged inquisitor. But Patel wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a denial. He was going to give him something far more dangerous: context. As I was preparing for my confirmation hearing, Patel said, his voice cutting through the room's ambient noise like a scalpel. He didn't shout. He didn't emote. He merely stated facts. I had numerous discussions involving the type of people that would be employed. Patel paused, letting the logic sink in. To anyone outside the Beltway bubble, this was common sense. If you're hired to turn around a failing company, you talk about firing the incompetent managers before you take the job. But in Washington, competence was often confused with conspiracy, and that those that were failing to meet the mark at the FBI would no longer be employed if I were confirmed. There it was. The heresy. The idea that a federal employee, a member of the protected class of the deep state, could be fired for failing to meet the mark. The silence in the room deepened. The staffers behind Booker stopped shuffling papers. This wasn't the script. Patel wasn't cowering. He was announcing a purge of incompetence, and he was doing it with the casual demeanor of a man ordering lunch. Booker sensed the danger. The narrative was slipping away. He needed to reframe this immediately. He couldn't let competence be the standard. He needed a buzzword that would trigger the outrage algorithms on social media. He needed to paint Patel not as a reformer, but as a henchman. Booker lunged for the microphone, cutting Patel off. And I'm assuming that mark had to do with loyalty to the Trump administration. Booker sneered. He said the word loyalty with a curled lip, as if it were a synonym for treason. It was the favorite projection of the Democratic Party, accusing the opposition of demanding fealty while they themselves demanded absolute ideological conformity. Booker leaned back, looking satisfied. He thought he had landed the blow. He had pivoted the conversation from performance to politics. Checkmate, he thought. Patel didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. He looked at Booker with the mild curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under glass. No, Patel said. You're wrong. The rejection was absolute. It wasn't defensive. It was a dismissal. Okay, Booker said quickly, retreating. He realized the loyalty line wasn't going to stick. Patel's armor was too thick, his demeanor too grounded. If Booker kept pressing on this, he would look like he was arguing against meritocracy. Booker shifted in his seat. The leather creaked loudly, betraying his agitation. He needed a new angle. The personnel trap had failed. He needed to go to the legal trap. He shuffled his papers aggressively, a physical manifestation of his internal pivot. He found the page he was looking for, the notes on the grand jury. This was safer ground. This was legal technicality. This was where he could confuse the public with jargon. I'd like to revisit another subject from that hearing, Booker said, his voice regaining some of its theatrical strength. He adjusted his glasses again. Did you testify? He stumbled over the words. The adrenaline was making him sloppy. Excuse me, you did testify before the grand jury that President Trump had declassified the documents at issue in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. Is that correct? Booker's eyes locked onto Patel. This was the perjury trap. It was a favorite tool of the establishment. Ask a question about a secret proceeding, wait for a slight variation in the answer, and then scream, liar, regardless of the truth. Patel knew exactly what this was. He had seen the Department of Justice weaponize grand jury secrecy for years. They used the shield of the law not to protect the innocent, but to hide their own machinations. I don't have the grand jury transcript, Patel replied. It was a brilliant parry. I cannot confirm what I said word for word because your Department of Justice refuses to give me my own words. That's why I released it. Booker shot back triumphantly. Whatever it says is the best evidence. Patel's eyebrows raised a fraction of a millimeter. Released it? You know, Booker continued, rushing to fill the silence. That's what you said to Senator Whitehouse. that your grand jury testimony was publicly released. Booker was weaving a web of confusion. He was conflating public statements with sealed testimony, trying to catch Patel in a contradiction about the process rather than the substance. It has not been, Booker declared, answering his own question, playing both prosecutor and judge. In fact, in July, a court denied a news outlet's bid to get that transcript. Booker was enjoying this. He felt like he was lecturing a law student. He waved a finger in the air. But the court said quite clearly that you are free to discuss your grand jury testimony. Here was the setup. You're free to talk, so talk. And if you talk, and it contradicts one syllable of the secret record I have right here, I will destroy you. So, I ask you again, Booker leaned in, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, the cameras zooming in for the money shot. Did you testify before the grand jury that President Trump declassified the documents at issue in the Mar-a-Lago classified document case? The room held its breath. This was the precipice. If Patel answered yes, Booker would pull out a redacted page and claim he said maybe. If Patel answered no, Booker would claim he lied to the public. Patel looked at Booker. He saw the sweat beading on the senator's upper lip. He saw the hunger for a viral clip. And that is why I took your invitation to work with the department and the court to have that transcript released, Patel said calmly. He wasn't taking the bait. He was flipping the table. And the transcript is the best evidence of what I said, Patel concluded. If you want the truth, Senator, release the document. Don't ask me to play a memory game with a loaded gun. So you're saying right now this committee can have access to what you said before the grand jury? Booker asked, feigning confusion to buy time. To whatever was released under my understanding, Senator, that the department, you and I both understand the law. Booker snapped, cutting him off. The mask of civility was slipping. Booker was frustrated. The witness wasn't cowering. The witness was adhering to a strict legal standard that made Booker's theatrics look cheap. Let me finish, Booker demanded, though he was the one interrupting. I understand under Rule 6 of the Federal Rules of Procedure a grand jury witness is not barred from sharing their grand jury testimony. Booker was lecturing now. He was mansplaining the law to a former federal prosecutor and public defender. This is an oversight hearing. Booker's voice rose an octave. This is germane to your integrity and credibility. The words integrity and credibility hung in the air, dripping with irony. Here was a man who had spent years pushing the Russia collusion hoax, lecturing Kash Patel on integrity. You know right now whether or not you testified. Booker pointed a finger, jabbing the air. Why are you refusing to answer that simple yes or no question right now? The pressure in the room was suffocating. The Democratic staffers were nodding vigorously, like bobbleheads, urging their champion on. Crush him. Make him crack. Patel didn't crack. He didn't even bend. He looked at Booker with a gaze that stripped away the senator's title and left only the politician exposed. Because the premise of your question is inaccurate, Patel said. It was the ultimate insult to a man like Booker. Your logic is flawed. Your trap is broken. Your movie is boring. And Patel started to continue. There is no premise to my question, but trying to get to an order of what is truth or not. Booker shouted, his voice cracking. Booker was unraveling. The cool, collected statesman was gone. In his place was a frustrated partisan who couldn't understand why his old tricks weren't working. How do you know? Booker demanded, flailing. How do you know what was asked in the grand jury if you weren't there? Mr. Patel, Booker groaned, a sound of pure exasperation. This is a mockery you're making of this hearing. Booker declared, but as the echoes of his accusation bounced off the marble walls, everyone in the room, the press, the staffers, and certainly Kash Patel, knew the truth. The only mockery happening in this room was the one Cory Booker was making of himself. And Kash Patel was just getting started. The air in the hearing room had changed. It was no longer the sharp, electric crackle of a legal duel. It had thickened, becoming heavy and cloying, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Senator Cory Booker leaned back in his leather chair, a physical retreat from the skirmish he had just lost. The grand jury trap had snapped shut on empty air. Patel hadn't panicked. He hadn't perjured himself. He had simply refused to play. Booker needed a new weapon. Logic had failed. The law had failed. It was time for pathos. He looked down his binder, his fingers tracing the edge of a glossy photograph clipped to a dossier. This was his ace in the hole. This was how you destroyed a man like Kash Patel. Not with statutes, but with stories. You needed a victim. You needed a martyr. Mr. Patel, Booker said, his voice dropping to a register of sorrowful disappointment. He shook his head slowly, a gesture practiced to perfection in front of a mirror. This is a mockery you're making of this hearing and simple question. He paused, letting the accusation hang. He wanted the audience at home to feel his pain. He wanted them to believe that he, Cory Booker, was the only thing standing between democracy and chaos. If you have, Mr. Patel, Booker continued, winding up for the pitch. During your nomination, you promised that, quote, all FBI employees will be protected against political retribution. Patel sat motionless. He knew exactly where this was going. It was the oldest trick in the bureaucratic playbook. Equate accountability with retribution. If a deep state operative leaked classified info to the New York Times, firing them was retribution. If a supervisor ignored orders from the president, firing them was politicization. Patel watched Booker's eyes. They were wide, imploring. When I ask you, are you aware of any plans or discussions to punish in any way, including termination, FBI agents or personnel associated with the Trump administration? Booker asked. You explicitly said under oath that you were not aware of any plans to punish FBI agents associated with criminal investigations of Donald Trump. Booker leaned forward, his voice hardening. I don't believe you were truthful. The accusation landed with a dull thud. In a courtroom, calling a witness a liar without evidence is objectionable. In a Senate hearing, it's a clip for MSNBC. Firing FBI employees based solely on the cases that they are investigating, their case assignments, is illegal, Booker lectured. He was building a straw man, a fictional version of Patel who fired people just for doing their jobs. Patel remained silent. He didn't interrupt. He didn't grimace. He knew the reality of the FBI he had inherited. He knew about the rot in the 7th floor suites. He knew about the agents who had turned the Bureau into a private security force for the Democratic National Committee. But he couldn't say that yet. He had to let Booker finish his performance. And you know that a new lawsuit that's been discussed numerous times, Booker said, waving a hand dismissively, filed by 3 FBI officials alleges that you carried out Donald Trump's campaign of retribution, in quotes, against FBI employees for, quote, failure to demonstrate sufficient political loyalty. Booker paused for effect. He was setting the stage. Now, he would bring out the body. One of those plaintiffs has been discussed today, Booker said, his voice trembling slightly with manufactured reverence. Brian Driscoll. The name was dropped like a holy relic. Now we know. Booker continued, reading from a prepared biography, his voice swelling with admiration. 20 years of distinguished service to the FBI before you terminated him. Special agent in charge of FBI's Newark field office where he operated with distinction. Booker looked up at the camera, making sure the people of Newark were watching. Medal of Valor winner. Booker intoned, emphasizing each syllable. Shield of Bravery awards. He's a patriot. The room was silent. Booker was painting a portrait of a saint. A war hero. A man beyond reproach. By implication, the man who fired him, Kash Patel, must be a monster. You terminated Driscoll via a letter dated October 8, 2025, Booker said, holding up a piece of paper as if it were a death warrant. And in that letter, you said that you were firing him pursuant to Article 2 of the Constitution. Booker chuckled darkly, a sound of disbelief. Well, you're not the President of the United States, Booker scoffed. And so, I'm wondering under what authority you were allowed to terminate him. It was a trap wrapped in a tragedy. Booker was using Driscoll's medals as a shield to deflect from the reason for the termination. He was daring Patel to attack a hero. Patel looked at the senator. He thought about the file on Brian Driscoll. He thought about the insubordination. He thought about the leaks. He thought about the decisions made in the Newark field office that had nothing to do with valor and everything to do with politics. But Patel was bound. He was the director of the FBI. He could not discuss personnel matters in an open hearing. He could not smear a former agent on live television, even if the agent deserved it. The law that Booker claimed to love so much prohibited Patel from defending himself with the truth. Booker knew this. That was why the trap was so vicious. He was attacking a man whose hands were tied behind his back. That matter is under litigation, Patel said. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was the only answer he could give. And I'm not able to discuss it, Patel finished. Booker's face lit up. This was what he wanted. He wanted the stonewall. He wanted Patel to look evasive. He didn't want the truth about Driscoll. He wanted the silence about Driscoll. Okay, Booker said, leaning back, a smug satisfaction settling over his features. He had won that round. In his mind, he had protected the narrative. But he wasn't done. The human shield tactic had worked, so now he would try the guilt by association tactic. He needed to link Patel to a villain. He needed a boogeyman. Well, discuss this. Booker pivoted, his eyes narrowing. Did you have discussions with Stephen Miller? He said the name like a curse word. In the mythology of the left, Stephen Miller was the Dark Prince, the architect of cruelty. Merely speaking his name was intended to summon a cloud of sulfur. About firing this particular person or about his continuance in the FBI? Booker watched Patel closely. He expected a flinch. He expected Patel to distance himself from Miller, to say, I barely know him, or we don't talk. That was what Republicans usually did. They threw each other under the bus to appease the media gods. Patel didn't flinch. Not that I recall, Patel said. How often do you speak to Stephen Miller? Booker pressed, sensing blood. Frequently, Patel answered immediately. Booker blinked. Frequently? He admitted it. On our Homeland Security task forces, Patel added. It was a brilliant de-escalation. By adding the context, Patel stripped the name Stephen Miller of its mystical power. He wasn't conspiring in a dark alley. They were working on task forces. It made the Dark Prince sound like a boring bureaucrat. Booker tried to recover. You frequently talk with Stephen Miller about subjects other than Homeland Security Task Force issues. Correct, Booker asked, trying to find a conspiracy again. I frequently talk to Mr. Miller about Homeland Security Task Forces, Patel repeated, his voice flat. Has Stephen Miller ever given you his opinions on how to run your agency? Booker demanded. Patel paused. He looked at Booker, and for a brief second, a flicker of amusement crossed his eyes. Booker was so desperate to find a puppet master. He couldn't conceive that Patel was his own man. He needed to believe that there was a string being pulled by Miller or Trump or Bannon. Mr. Miller's interagency operations are invaluable to the FBI, Patel said. He wasn't apologizing. He was doubling down. That's what we talk about. Booker stared. He had fired his best shots. He had used the saint, Driscoll, and the demon, Miller. And Patel was still sitting there, unbruised, looking at his watch as if wondering when the real hearing would begin. So you frequently discuss your job and your responsibilities with Stephen Miller. Booker trailed off, running out of steam on this line of questioning. And Pam Bondi, I imagine as well. Absolutely, Patel said. She's the Attorney General. The logic was bulletproof. I talked to the Attorney General because I work for the Department of Justice. Bulga sight. The gotcha moments were slipping through his fingers like sand. He looked at the clock. His time was ticking away. He had spent minutes trying to pin Patel down on personnel issues and had achieved nothing but a masterclass in gray rocking. He needed to go bigger. He needed to go broader. If he couldn't get Patel on a specific firing, he would attack the entire mission. He would paint a picture of an America descending into darkness. Booker took a deep breath. He adjusted his microphone again. He was about to deliver the soliloquy he had been practicing all week. The end of democracy speech. Understood. Okay, Booker said, his voice taking on a somber, preacher-like cadence. Donald Trump promised to make us all safer, Booker began. He paused. The room fell silent. This was the wind-up for the haymaker. You have pushed out senior FBI agents with decades of knowledge and experience. In fact, this is the first time in FBI history that neither the director nor the deputy director have any experience with the FBI. Booker was gaining momentum now. He was in his element, the grand narrative. You've shifted the agency's priorities primarily to pursuing Donald Trump's immigration enforcement agenda. Booker grabbed a piece of paper, waving it like a flag. According to IC data, the Cato Institute, which is a conservative think tank, Booker emphasized conservative to show he was being bipartisan, found that 20% of all agents have been diverted from their work to assist IC immigration enforcement. 20%. Booker looked at Patel with genuine disgust. In his worldview, enforcing immigration law was a sin. It was a distraction. The FBI should be hunting white supremacists and domestic extremists, not securing the border. Part of this operation is the work of mass law enforcement who jump out of cars, snatch people off streets at churches, schools, and their jobs in hospitals, Booker said, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. He was painting a dystopian nightmare. Gestapo tactics, snatch squads. It was vivid. It was terrifying. It was also, from Patel's perspective, a complete fabrication of standard law enforcement procedure. Have there been any FBI agents who investigate crimes against children that have been assigned to immigration enforcement? Yes or no? Booker demanded. It was a loaded gun of question. The think of the children gambit. Patel leaned into the mic. He had had enough of the fiction. The premise of what you say is entire. Patel began, ready to dismantle the lie. Have there been any FBI agents to investigate foreign domestic terrorists? Booker shouted over him. Booker didn't want an answer. He wanted to drown out the rebuttal. He knew that if Patel spoke, the spell would break. You don't get to say that America is not safer under this leadership. Booker yelled, his composure fraying. America is safer because of the work of the FBI. You're making a presumption of... Patel tried to interject. 2,700 children. Booker screamed. We have seized 6,000 weapons and felons. Booker was speaking in tongues now, mixing up his own talking points. He was flustered. He was listing Patel's successes, seizing weapons, saving children, but trying to frame them as failures because of who was doing the work. That FBI agents who investigate human trafficking have been reassigned to immigration enforcement. Booker continued, breathless. You are not denying that FBI agents who are on the task force that fight against Russian oligarchs have not been reassigned. Booker was hyperventilating. The Russian oligarchs, the holy grail of the establishment. How dare you stop hunting Russians to hunt child traffickers? Public correction squad reassigned. People who defend us, defend children, reassigned. You're not denying that. Booker was shouting at a brick wall. Patel sat there, watching the senator unravel. I've seen you time and time again attack my colleagues' premises of questions as a way to not answer the question, Booker spat out. He leaned back, chest heaving. He was exhausted. He had thrown everything he had. The grand jury, Driscoll, Miller, the children, the Russians. And Kash Patel was still sitting there. Calm. Ready. So let me end with this, Booker whispered, the calm before the final storm. But Patel knew, and everyone watching knew, Booker wasn't ending. He was just reloading. So let me end with this, Senator Cory Booker said. The phrase was a lie. In the theater of the Senate, let me end with this is never an ending. It is a signal that the monologue is entering its Baroque phase. It is the moment when the politician stops pretending to ask questions and starts cutting campaign ads. Booker adjusted his glasses, peering over the rim at Kash Patel. The senator's face was set in a mask of tragic burden, as if the weight of the entire republic were resting on his shoulders, and Kash Patel was the one chipping away at his knees. I believe you have made our country weaker and less safe, Booker declared. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Patel watched him. He didn't scribble a note. He didn't lean over to whisper to counsel. He simply observed. To Patel, this wasn't an oversight hearing anymore. It was an autopsy of the establishment psyche. Booker was projecting. Every accusation he was about to hurl was a confession of what the previous administration had done. I believe that we are more vulnerable to a major event, Booker continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, and I pray to God it doesn't happen. Fear, Patel thought. The currency of the swamp. When they can't debate the data, they threaten you with the apocalypse. You've gutted the Bureau of Institutional Knowledge and Expertise, Booker said, his voice rising in rhythm. You've fired or pushed out seasoned FBI officials, many with more than 20 years of experience, and were working on cases that were critical. Booker was mourning the old guard. He was eulogizing the very men who had signed the FISA warrants against Carter Page, the men who had labeled parents at school board meetings as domestic terrorists, the men who had buried the Hunter Biden laptop. To Booker, they were seasoned officials. To Patel, they were the antibodies rejecting the cure. You've been purging thousands of serious law enforcement officials who spent their careers keeping us safe only to lower hiring standards in order to find anyone to replace them, Booker said. He was picking up speed now, the words tumbling out faster, a frantic cadence meant to overwhelm. And shockingly, you admitted in this hearing to Senator Coons that it would take 14 years to fill the vacancies at your agency. Many are the result of your purge. Patel's expression remained granite. The 14 years figure was a statistic about growth, not vacancies, but Booker didn't care about the math. He cared about the soundbite. 20% of FBI agents are doing low-level immigration enforcement instead of their mission-critical work, Booker repeated, circling back to his favorite grievance. Then, he played the card that every Republican in the room knew was coming. The inevitable, tired, dusty card. You've disbanded entire task forces that stop election interference, foreign influence, public corruption. And who benefits from this? Booker paused. He leaned forward, his eyes wide, selling the conspiracy. Well, corrupt people benefit from it. Criminals benefit from it. He took a breath. Vladimir Putin benefits from it. There it was. Russia, the ghost in the machine. After years of debunked dossiers, after the Mueller report found nothing, after the entire narrative had collapsed, Cory Booker was still clinging to Vladimir Putin like a security blanket. Patel almost smiled. It was almost nostalgic. It showed a lack of imagination. If this was the best they had, accusing him of being a Kremlin asset because he moved agents to the southern border, then they were truly out of ammunition. And it really makes me wonder who you're looking out for, Booker sneered. It makes me think we can't trust you as a nation. Booker was now riffing, jumping from topic to topic, a stream of consciousness attack designed to hit every keyword in the DNC focus group results. You swear to release the Epstein files, Booker said, pointing a finger, but now you're withholding the Epstein files. For a split second, the room went cold. It was a dangerous line for Booker to cross. Everyone in Washington knew that the Epstein list was a landmine that threatened people on both sides of the aisle, but disproportionately the friends of the establishment. For Booker to accuse Patel, the man who had built his career on declassification, of hiding the files was a level of gaslighting that bordered on art. Patel's eyes narrowed slightly. You want the files, Senator? Be careful what you wish for. You claim that you have a suspect in a serious assassination. Whoops, Booker mocked, making a dismissive gesture. Then you don't have a suspect. You know nothing about plans to remove FBI agents, yet you're directly involved in those plans. Booker was breathless. He was sprinting now, try to cross the finish line before anyone could check his facts. In the words of an ex-FBI official, you are overseeing, and I quote, generational destruction of the nation's premier law enforcement agency. Booker savored the phrase generational destruction. It sounded epic. It sounded biblical. Mr. Patel, in just 8 months, you have assaulted the institutional integrity of the FBI. Booker shook his head, looking down at his desk, then back up, his face softening into a mask of fake camaraderie. He was pivoting from the attack dog to the wise elder. But I know FBI field agents, Booker said softly. I've worked with them in Newark. He placed a hand on his chest. No matter how truly bad you are, you can't undermine the legacy of agents who fight every day to keep us safe. It was a classic rhetorical maneuver. Separate the leader from the troops. Praise the workers while knifing the boss. I believe you're failing, Booker said, his voice dripping with disappointment. Failing as a leader. And that your failure does have serious implications for the safety and security of Americans and our families. He was winding down. The sermon was ending. But Booker had one last dagger to twist. He didn't just want to insult Patel's competence. He wanted to insult his future. "I don't think you're fit to handle the bureau," Booker said. Then, a smirk touched the corner of his mouth. A nasty, knowing smirk. "But here's the thing, Mr. Patel. I think you're not going to be around long." The room went quiet. This was an oversight. This was a threat. Or worse, a prophecy. "I think this might be your last oversight hearing," Booker said, leaning in, enjoying his own prediction. "Because as much as you supplicate yourself to the will of Donald Trump and not the Constitution of the United States of America." Booker paused to let the name Trump sizzle in the air. "Donald Trump has shown us in his first term, and in this term, he is not loyal to people like you." It was a psychological shank. Booker was trying to plant a seed of doubt in Patel's mind. "Your boss will betray you. You are expendable. You are nothing. He will cut you loose," Booker whispered. "This may be the last time I have a hearing with you, because I don't think you're long for your job." Booker sat back, looking satisfied. He had psychoanalyzed the witness. He had predicted his demise. He had claimed the moral high ground. "But I'm going to tell you this," Booker added, his voice taking on a sickly sweet tone. "I pray for you." The ultimate condescension. The weaponized prayer. It was the political equivalent of "bless your heart." "I pray for you that you can step up and defend your oath, defend the Constitution, and do a much better job of defending this country." Booker closed his binder. He looked at the chairman. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." He exhaled loudly, a performance of exhaustion. He had done his duty. He had spoken truth to power. He expected silence. He expected Patel to lick his wounds. The chairman, Senator Chuck Grassley, leaned into his microphone. He was an old lion of the Senate, and he had seen 1,000 speeches like Booker's. He wasn't impressed. "Do you want to say anything?" the chairman asked Patel. It was an open door. Booker's head snapped up. He hadn't expected a rebuttal. His time was up, which meant the segment should be over. He had dropped the mic. He didn't want a mic picked back up. Patel leaned forward. The silence that followed Booker's 5-minute tirade was broken by 2 words. "Yes, sir," Patel said. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. That rant of false information does not bring this country together. Rant. The word hit Booker like a slap in the face. He had just delivered what he thought was a Gettysburg Address of moral clarity, and this bureaucrat dismissed it as a rant. "If you want to work on bringing this country," Patel continued, "it's my time, not yours." Booker barked. The mask fell. Instantaneously, the wise elder vanished. The concerned statesman evaporated. In their place sat a man with thin skin and a short fuse. Booker slammed his hand on the table. "My God!" Booker shouted. "My God!" He was sputtering. The calm demeanor of the last 10 minutes was exposed as a fraud. He couldn't handle 5 seconds of pushback. "If you want to talk about dividing this country," Booker yelled, pointing an accusing finger at Patel, "I follow you on your social media posts that tear this country apart." Patel didn't react, but internally, the victory was secured. "You follow me?" Booker just admitted he was obsessed. He wasn't reading intelligence reports. He was doom-scrolling Kash Patel's Truth social feed at 2 a.m. "Oh, you could try all you want in this country to not say responsibility for what you have said, sir." Booker's syntax was breaking down. He was shouting gibberish. "You're the democracy of this committee," Booker yelled. It made no sense. He was flailing. "Sir, you don't tell me my time is over." Booker screamed, his voice cracking. The chairman tried to bang his gavel. "Senator Booker, the people of New Jersey tell me what my time is." Booker roared, his face flushing red. "You can't lecture me." The room was in chaos. The staffers looked terrified. This wasn't supposed to happen. Booker was the happy warrior, the love and light candidate. Now he was screaming like a landlord evicting a tenant. "You may be charging," Booker stammered, losing the word. "And I'm not afraid of you." "Mr. Chairman," Patel said. His voice was a flat line amidst the chaos. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't look afraid. He looked bored. "I'm not afraid of you." Booker shouted again, desperate to convince himself. "Mr. Chairman, point of order," Patel said calmly. "Senator Booker," the chairman cut in, his voice weary. I announced at the beginning of this meeting that this back and forth talking over each other doesn't work. Booker was still fuming, his chest heaving. He looked around the room, seeking validation. And I said if that happened, the chairman continued. I asked Patel not to respond, and I was going to give him some time after the senator's time was up to respond. Mr. Chairman, Booker interrupted again. He couldn't stop. He was like a train with no brakes. One point. Go ahead, mister. I've watched him talk over us. Booker whined. It was the complaint of a child who had lost a game. And you've never once criticized him for us not even being able to get our questions out. Well, the chairman said, delivering the verdict with dry, Midwestern bluntness. He has been rude and disrespectful to senator after senator. He was talking about Patel, ostensibly to placate Booker, but the tone suggested he was talking about the entire spectacle. And when the senators were not giving him a chance to answer, I didn't stop the senator either, the chairman added. He looked at Patel. Go ahead, Senator, the chairman said to the next person in line. No. He looked at Patel. He signaled for the rebuttal. Booker slumped back in his chair. He had screamed. He had shouted. He had claimed he wasn't afraid. But now, the room belonged to Kash Patel. The rant was over. The silence returned. And in that silence, Patel prepared to do the one thing Cory Booker feared most. He prepared to read the numbers. The echo of Senator Booker's scream, "I am not afraid of you," seemed to hang in the vaulted ceiling of the hearing room, a ghostly remnant of a battle already lost. The outburst had achieved the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of projecting strength, it had projected instability. The room was uncomfortable. The staffers behind the dais were looking down at their shoes or furiously typing on their BlackBerries, avoiding eye contact with the man they served. It was the awkward silence that follows a plate being smashed at a family dinner. Senator Chuck Grassley, the chairman, rubbed his temple. He had seen Decorum die a slow death in the Senate over 40 years, but today was a new low. He looked at Kash Patel. Go ahead, Grassley said. It was a simple permission, a green light. Kash Patel adjusted the microphone. He didn't look at Booker. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked down at a single sheet of paper on his desk. Not a script, but a cheat sheet of metrics. The key performance indicators of the FBI. Booker was still breathing hard, his chest rising and falling, adrenaline flooding his system. He had expected a fight. He had expected Patel to snap back, to engage in the mudslinging. You're a partisan hack. You're a demagogue. That was the script. If Patel attacked him personally, Booker could play the victim. He could claim he was being bullied. But Patel didn't attack. He didn't even acknowledge the senator's existence as a human being. He treated the senator as an incorrect data point that needed to be debugged. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Patel said. His voice was a low rumble, stripped of all theatricality. It was the voice of a surgeon explaining a procedure to a hysterical patient. If the FBI, under my 7-month leadership, were failing this administration and this country, Patel began, picking up the thread of Booker's accusation and examining it in the light. He paused. Why do we have 23,000 violent felons arrested this year alone? The number landed in the room like a physical weight. 23,000. Patel let it sit there. He didn't rush. A double increase from that time last year, he added. Booker blinked. His mouth opened slightly, as if to interrupt, but he found no air. He had just spent 10 minutes painting a picture of an FBI that was distracted, gutted, and obsessed with immigration. He had claimed the streets were less safe. And in one sentence, Patel had produced a statistic that proved the FBI was twice as effective at catching violent criminals than it had been under the previous administration. Patel continued. The rhythm was starting. It was a drumbeat. Why is it that we have seized 6,000 weapons? Patel asked. He looked up, scanning the room. Why we found 1,500 child predators and arrested them. The child predator stat was a strategic nuke. Booker had specifically accused Patel of moving agents away from crimes against children. He had invoked the 2,700 children line in his rant. Patel was now correcting the record with the brutality of math. We didn't abandon them. We found 1,500 of the monsters you couldn't catch. Why we put 300 human traffickers in jail? Patel continued, his voice gaining a hard edge. Why have we found and identified 4,700 children? 4,700 children. To the pro-Republican observer, this was the vindication. While the Democrats had spent years talking about root causes and social justice, the new FBI was kicking down doors and pulling children out of basements. While Booker was rehearsing his speeches in the mirror, Patel's agents were putting handcuffs on traffickers. The silence in the room was now absolute. The hired guns, the partisan staffers stopped typing. You can spin a quote. You can spin a policy decision. You cannot spin 4,700 rescued children. But Patel wasn't done. He was moving from the moral crimes, children, trafficking, to the existential crimes, drugs. Why have we seen 1,600 kilograms of fentanyl seized? Patel asked. He looked directly at the camera now, breaking the fourth wall. He wanted the American people to understand the scale of that number. Enough to kill a third of the American public, he clarified. A third of the country. One shipment. Gone. A 25% increase alone from last year, Patel noted. He was layering the data. Absolute numbers. Percentage growth. Lethality. It was a complete picture of competence. 88,000 kilograms of cocaine seized. Patel droned on, relentless. 700 kilograms of meth seized. And that's just on our criminal operations in summer heat. The phrase summer heat was a subtle flex. It implied that this was just the beginning. This was the FBI working up a sweat. This was the agency warming up. Booker shifted in his chair. He looked small. The Grand Inquisitor had shrunk into a man listening to a quarterly earnings report he didn't understand. He tried to look at his notes, searching for a counterargument, but there was nothing there. His binder was full of opposition research, tweets, and character assassinations. It contained zero data on fentanyl seizures because his team hadn't bothered to look. They assumed Patel was failing because they wanted him to fail. Then Patel delivered the dagger. The personal strike. How is it possible that we're taking 8 kilograms off the streets of the cities in New Jersey? Patel emphasized the state name. New Jersey. He was talking about Booker's backyard. He was talking about the streets Booker had claimed to represent. In preventing the deaths of 607,000 people this year alone, it was a masterstroke. Patel wasn't just doing his job. He was doing Booker's job. He was saving the lives of the very constituents Booker was using as props. While Booker was screaming in a committee room in D.C., Patel's purged and gutted FBI was saving 500,000 lives in Newark and Camden. A failure of the FBI and my leadership, Patel said sarcastically. How is that a failure? He didn't wait for an answer. He knew there wasn't one. How is it that we have counterintelligence arrests already this year exceeding the numbers from the entirety of last year? He pivoted to the national security argument. Booker had invoked Vladimir Putin. Booker had claimed Russia benefited from Patel's tenure. 33% increase in PRC, Patel listed. The People's Republic of China, the real threat. 83% in Russia. 83%. The number shattered the Russian asset narrative into a million pieces. If Patel was a stooge for Putin, he was doing a terrible job of it. He was arresting nearly double the number of Russian operatives than the professionals who preceded him. 60% in the CI space as it relates to Iran. China, Russia, Iran, the axis of evil. All up, all being hunted. And we haven't even talked about CT, Patel said, referring to counterterrorism, dismissing it as if it were just another win in a pile of wins. The southern border, the northern border. Patel stopped. He leaned back. He had spoken for less than 2 minutes. In that time, he had laid out a record of success that most FBI directors couldn't achieve in a decade. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't called Booker names. He hadn't mentioned deep state or witch hunt. He had simply used the truth. The room felt different now. The atmosphere of gotcha had evaporated. The air was sterile, cleaned by the cold light of facts. Booker looked at the chairman. He looked at the clock. He looked anywhere but at Kash Patel. The moment he had tried to create, the viral clip of him taking down the Trump henchman, was dead. Instead, he had just provided the B-roll for Kash Patel's highlight reel. Before Senator Cruz, Patel said, looking to his right, acknowledging the next questioner. He allowed a moment of humanity to seep in, a moment of genuine weariness. I kind of feel like a broken record today, Patel sighed. It was the sigh of a man who is tired of winning, tired of explaining that the sky is blue to people who are paid to insist it is green. All this interest in FBI termination, Patel mused, looking back at Booker one last time. Yet my colleagues showed no intent or interest when my whistleblower suffered retaliation over the past years, particularly the past 4 years. He was pivoting to the offense. He was reminding them that he was the victim of the system they were now pretending to defend. Indeed, one whistleblower has alleged that Brian Driscoll's insubordination. Patel dropped the name again. Driscoll, the saint from Chapter 2. Whether an agent is on a hot-button case or not, they ought to be held accountable for misconduct and weaponization. Patel closed his folder. The sound was soft, but final. To Senator Cruz, he said. He turned his head away from Booker. The dismissal was total. Booker was no longer the threat. He was the past. Senator Cruz, a friendly face, was the future. As the camera panned away from Cory Booker, the lens caught a fleeting expression on the senator's face. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't righteousness. It was confusion. It was the look of a man who had brought a knife to a gunfight, only to realize his opponent had arrived in a tank. The hearing would go on. There would be other questions. Other senators would try their luck. But everyone in the room knew the truth. The battle was over. The avalanche had fallen. And silence, the heavy, undeniable silence of competence, had won. The hearing did not end with a bang. It ended with the squeak of leather chairs and the shuffling of papers, the mundane sounds of bureaucracy reasserting itself after a moment of high drama. Senator Ted Cruz had taken a microphone, his voice a warm, Texas drawl that offered Kash Patel a temporary sanctuary. But the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. The Booker moment, that manufactured crescendo of outrage, had been defused, disassembled, and left in pieces on the floor like a broken toy. Patel sat through the remaining questions. He was polite. He was precise. But his mind was already moving past the Hart Senate office building. He was thinking about the decrypts waiting on his desk at the J. Edgar Hoover building. He was thinking about the deployment schedules for the new fentanyl task force in the Midwest. He was thinking about the work. When Chairman Grassley finally banged the gavel, signaling the recess, the room erupted into a chaotic hive of motion. This hearing is adjourned. The words triggered a stampede. The press pool, sensing the narrative had been complicated, surged forward, shouting questions that were designed to fit pre-written headlines. Director Patel, will you resign? Director, did you threaten Senator Booker? Director, what about the Epstein files? Patel stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He didn't look at the shouting mass of reporters. He didn't look at the Democratic staffers who were furiously whispering into their phones, likely leaking a spin that would try to salvage Booker's dignity by the evening news cycle. He turned to his left, where a young aide handed him his briefcase. The exchange was silent. No word were needed. The team knew. Patel began the long walkout. The hallway of the Hart building is a cavern of white marble, designed to make humans feel insignificant and the state feel eternal. As Patel walked, flanked by his security detail, the sound of his footsteps echoed with a rhythmic precision. Click, click, click. He passed the clusters of lobbyists and low-level staffers who huddled in the alcoves. They stopped talking as he passed. They stared. 6 months ago, they had stared at him with contempt. He was the interloper, the conspiracy theorist, the Trump loyalist who had crashed the party. They had whispered that he wouldn't last a month. They had placed bets on his resignation date. Today, they didn't stare with contempt. They stared with fear. Not physical fear. Patel wasn't a violent man. It was the fear of obsolescence. They had just watched him dismantle one of their champions, Cory Booker, not with insults, but with efficiency. They had realized, perhaps for the first time, that the new order wasn't just angry. It was competent. And that was terrifying. If the MAGA movement was just a chaotic riot, the establishment could handle it. Chaos they could manage. Chaos justified more funding, more control, more committees. But competence? Competence was an existential threat. If Kash Patel could arrest 23,000 violent felons and seize enough fentanyl to kill a third of the country without the help of the old guard, then what was the point of the old guard? Patel felt their gaze. He ignored it. He was immune to it. He reached the heavy glass doors at the end of the corridor. His security lead, a man named Miller, no relation to Stephen, pushed the door open. The blast of humidity from the DC afternoon hit them like a wet towel. Outside, the circus was in full swing. A phalanx of cameras was set up on the sidewalk. Protesters were chanting slogans that had been printed on identical signs, paid for by the same NGOs that were currently under investigation by Patel's Financial Crimes Division. Fascist, fascist, fascist. The chant had lost its bite. It had become background noise, like the traffic on Constitution Avenue. Patel moved toward the waiting SUV. The black Suburban was an armored beast, a bubble of silence in a noisy city. He slid into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy, reassuring thunk, sealing out the chants, the heat, and the swamp. The interior was cool. The air smelled of leather and sanitizer. "Back to the Hoover, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes," Patel said. "Take the long way. Go past them all." He needed a moment. Just a moment to decompress before he stepped back into the war room. As the motorcade pulled away, merging aggressively into the traffic, Patel looked out the tinted window. The city of Washington passed by in a blur of neoclassical architecture and bureaucratic sprawl. He thought about Cory Booker. He didn't hate the man. Hate required energy, and Patel didn't have energy to waste. He pitied him. Booker was a man trapped in a dying paradigm. He was playing a game of gotcha in a world that had moved on to survival. Booker believed that the purpose of government was to perform, to give speeches, to cry on camera, to signal virtue. To Booker, the FBI was a prop, a backdrop for his morality plays about diversity and inclusion. But to Patel, the FBI was a weapon, a tool. Its purpose was not to make people feel good. Its purpose was to stop bad things from happening to good people. The numbers he had read out, 4,700 children found, weren't just statistics. They were 4,700 nightmares ended. There were 4,700 families who would sleep tonight because his agents had kicked down a door. Booker hadn't cared about those children. He had only cared that the agents rescuing them weren't hunting insurrectionists or Russian bots. That, Patel thought, is why they are losing. They had become so obsessed with the abstract, with democracy, with norms, with institutions, that they had forgotten the concrete. They had forgotten the fentanyl overdose in Ohio, the child trafficked in Texas, the gang shooting in New Jersey. They loved humanity, but they didn't seem to care much for humans. The SUV turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue. The Capitol dome loomed in the distance, white and pristine against the gray sky. It looked beautiful. It looked majestic. But Patel knew the rot inside the foundation was deep. He looked down at his phone. A message from Stephen Miller. Saw the numbers. 83% on Russia? You're killing the narrative, Kash. They have nothing left. Patel typed a brief reply. The narrative was dead a long time ago. They just haven't read the obituary. He put the phone away. The car slowed as it approached the J. Edgar Hoover building. The brutalist concrete fortress was ugly, imposing, and widely hated. Most people wanted to tear it down. Patel looked at it. It was a fortress under siege, not from the outside, but from within. For decades, the 7th floor had been occupied by men who used the bureau to protect their friends and punish their enemies. Men who leaked to the press. Men who lied to FISA courts. He was the antibody. He was the fever that was burning out the infection. It was painful. It was messy. The patient, the bureau, was screaming. The media was screaming. The Senate was screaming. But the fever was breaking. The car stopped at the security checkpoint. The guard, a young man with a serious face, peered into the back window. He saw Patel. He snapped a sharp salute. It wasn't the lazy salute of a bored employee. It was sharp, crisp, respectful. Patel nodded back. These were his people now. Not the suits in the conference rooms, but the guys at the checkpoints. The agents in the field. The ones who wanted to catch bad guys and go home to their families. They knew. They didn't watch MSNBC. They watched the case clearance rates. They watched the morale improve. They watched a director who actually had their backs when they did their jobs. The barrier lowered. The SUV rolled into the dark, subterranean garage. The darkness swallowed the car, but Patel didn't feel the gloom. He felt a strange, cold clarity. Booker had said, "I think you're not going to be around long." Patel allowed himself a small, dry smile. He wasn't going anywhere. The 14-year plan wasn't a joke. It wasn't a gaffe. It was a promise. It would take a generation to fix this. He opened the door before the security detail could reach it. He stepped out onto the concrete floor. The air here was stale, recycled, smelling of gasoline and secrets. He adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. Upstairs, on the 7th floor, a stack of termination letters was waiting for his signature. Another layer of the bureaucracy to be peeled away. Another task force to be realigned. Another fight. He wasn't tired. The hearing was just theater. This was the reality. Kash Patel walked toward the elevator. The door slid open with a soft chime. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, shutting out the world, he caught his own reflection in the polished steel of the elevator wall. He didn't see a villain. He didn't see a hero. He saw a janitor. And there was still so much mess to clean up. The elevator began to rise.